No meeting, no explanation. Just a 5-line email. Effective immediately, the department has been dissolved. Thank you for your service. 18 years. That's how long I spent building that department from a 3-desk unit crammed behind the server room into one of the most efficient arms of the company. It didn't happen overnight. It wasn't glamorous, but it worked. And I made sure it worked quietly, reliably, consistently. I'm Mark Beller. And until that morning, I managed a department that touched nearly every project the company ran. From systems audits to internal process design to infrastructure planning, most people in the building didn't even know existed. We weren't the face of the product. We didn't wear shiny suits or pitch ideas in glass-walled rooms. We were the ones that kept everything from falling apart behind the curtain. So when the email hit at 8:47 a.m. on a Thursday, no one saw it coming. Not me. Not the 9 people who worked under me. Not even the VP, who used to forward me after-hours questions when the executive team didn't know what to do with them. I sat at my desk and read the lines 3 times. It was cold, formulaic, signed off by someone I'd never spoken to in person. I didn't forward the email. I didn't slam my desk. I just sat there. It wasn't until 2 of my guys pinged me. Same time, same question. What is this? That it clicked. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a restructuring email sent to the wrong list. It was real. It was over. No conversation, no warning, just gone. They didn't even let me say goodbye. I started at the company when it was still small enough to know everyone by name. Back then, the founder used to walk the halls in a wrinkled shirt with coffee stains on his collar. He'd ask what you were working on, then stay for 20 minutes listening. That version of the company? It doesn't exist anymore. What replaced it was something slicker, more calculated, focused entirely on the next quarter's numbers, the next acquisition, the next round of boardroom applause. I'd felt the shift, of course. For years, you could sense the tide turning. New executives brought in from outside, departments suddenly merged, language getting more sanitized. Words like cost centers and efficiency realignment started popping up in memos. Still, I believed in the work. I believed in my team. I figured as long as we kept delivering, we were safe. That's where I was wrong. It wasn't about contribution anymore. It was about control. The writing was probably on the wall 6 months before it happened. I remember one meeting in particular, mid-November. A new VP had just been appointed, and he was doing his listening tour across departments. He sat in on one of our Monday morning syncs. No notes, no questions, just nodded through the hour. At the end, he pulled me aside and said, "You run a tight ship here, but we'll be looking at some structural changes soon." I asked if there was anything we should be preparing for. He smiled. "No action needed from your side, Mark. You're fine." He lied. The Monday after the email, I returned my badge. Security didn't even ask why. Just scanned it, gave a polite nod and said, "You're all set." By Tuesday, my team was scattered. Some were reassigned to other departments, others just left. A few were still waiting for answers when the company laptop stopped connecting to the server. That should have been it, right? Another quiet exit. Another footnote in a spreadsheet. Except, they forgot one thing. In their rush to cut us out, they overlooked the systems we built, the integrations, the databases, the workflows that supported everything from client onboarding to compliance reporting. They assumed it all ran on autopilot. They didn't realize it was our department that made it look that way. So, one by one, things started breaking. It started with missed deadlines, then incorrect reports, then a major compliance alert triggered by a routine audit that flagged a disconnect in their internal controls. I wasn't watching it all unravel with satisfaction. It wasn't personal, not at first, but when one of my old coworkers forwarded me an internal memo titled "Temporary Processing Delays Due to Infrastructure Bottlenecks," I couldn't help but shake my head. There weren't bottlenecks, there were just holes, gaping ones. And they were created the moment they took out the people who held it all together. What they didn't seem to understand was this: you can't rip out the spine of a system and expect it to stand. I got a call 10 days later, not from HR, not from the new leadership team, from someone I used to work with in the legal division. "I don't want to put you in a weird spot," he said, "but are you consulting right now?" That was the first ripple. Turns out the company was scrambling. They'd hired an outside firm to rebuild what they couldn't even describe. They didn't know the terminology, didn't have the documentation. We didn't leave a mess, we left a system. But systems require context, and they'd flushed all of it. I told him I wasn't looking for anything formal, but I'd answer a few questions. That led to another call, then another. Soon, I wasn't just helping them untangle their crisis. I was getting calls from former clients who heard I was no longer with the company. One of them asked if I'd be open to building something, independently. Now, here's the part they didn't see coming. When I was let go, I didn't threaten a lawsuit. I didn't write a bitter LinkedIn post. I didn't even update my profile. I just went quiet. But quiet doesn't mean inactive. Over the years, I'd built trust. Quiet trust. The kind that doesn't show up in shareholder slides. The kind that comes from showing up, delivering, and solving things before people even know they're broken. The clients remembered that. And one by one, they started reaching out. Not to complain, to ask, "Are you available?" 3 weeks after that email, I sat across from a former client, one of our biggest. They asked if I'd be willing to consult on rebuilding the back-end systems we originally designed for them, the same ones my former employer now couldn't support. I didn't hesitate. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about pride. It was about building something that would last, and doing it with people who valued it. They didn't fire one man. They deleted a foundation they didn't understand. And when it started crumbling, they didn't have the tools to fix it. In the weeks that followed, I watched from a distance as the company tried to patch the gaps. They spun the narrative, of course. Told stakeholders it was a transition phase, but the numbers didn't lie. Delays multiplied, cost overruns climbed. One division had to pause entirely due to system realignment. Another lost a key account due to missed compliance deadlines. The calls kept coming, some from former coworkers, some from clients. A few even from execs I never thought would speak my name again. I never said no to a conversation. But I made one thing clear. This time, it would be on my terms. I didn't start a business out of spite. I started it because people kept asking me to solve problems no one else could fix. That first contract, with the former client I met for coffee, wasn't a grand launch. It was a quiet start, a handshake, a list of what wasn't working. A rough plan, no office, no staff, just my experience, a laptop, and a legal pad full of scribbled diagrams. I called it an independent engagement. But it was more than that. It was the first time in nearly 2 decades that I felt free to work without politics creeping in around the edges. For 18 years, I had to tiptoe around executive egos, internal turf wars, and last-minute pivots designed to impress shareholders, not serve customers. This was different. The client had a real problem. They wanted it solved, and they trusted me to do it. So I did. 2 weeks into that first engagement, I was operating out of a spare bedroom in my house, a space I hadn't used in years. I cleaned out the boxes, plugged in a second monitor, and started rebuilding the architecture I once oversaw as part of a 50-person team. It wasn't glamorous, but it worked. And as soon as the fixes began showing results, the phone started ringing again. A friend in another division, a former teammate who'd landed at a different firm, an operations director I hadn't spoken to in months, calling to ask if I had availability next quarter. I hadn't advertised, I hadn't posted anything. I was just working. Quietly. Word spreads fast when solutions speak louder than press releases. By the end of the first month, I had 3 active clients and more interest than I could handle alone. I wasn't trying to scale, but it became clear that if I wanted to keep up, I couldn't do it all myself. So I reached out, carefully, not to recruiters, not to strangers, to people I'd worked with, people I trusted. I called a former analyst who'd been laid off with me. She picked up on the first ring. "I've got something," I said. "It's not full-time, but it's real." She didn't even ask for the rate. "When do you need me?" That was the first hire. Then came a systems engineer I used to collaborate with. Then a process specialist who knew the infrastructure like muscle memory. We weren't building a company. We were reclaiming something that had been discarded too easily. Meanwhile, the company that let us go was still trying to course correct. I didn't have insider access, but I didn't need it. The signs were public. They started outsourcing projects they once handled in-house. Then came a hiring freeze. Then came restructuring announcements that sounded all too familiar. The kicker was an industry report released that quarter, dry, formal, buried behind a paywall, that noted an unexpected drop in internal systems efficiency and increased reliance on third-party consultants. I didn't need the footnotes to know what happened. They thought they could rebuild everything with vendors and buzzwords. They underestimated the cost of institutional knowledge. They thought we were replaceable. But what they failed to grasp is that trust, alignment, and context, the kind you build slowly, year after year, isn't something you can import. Around month 3, I got a call from someone I hadn't heard from since the shutdown. She used to work in strategic accounts, managing some of our longest-standing client relationships. She was direct, always calm, and knew where every contract was buried. "Mark," she said, "do you know what they're doing with the Tier 2 workflows?" I told her no. I'd been out for a while. She laughed, not out of amusement, but disbelief. "They've outsourced the whole segment, and now one of the top clients is threatening to pull." I didn't ask for details. She sent them anyway, not because she was disloyal, but because she wanted to see things run properly. She cared. That's the part executives never understand. They think loyalty is about titles and stock options. It's not. It's about ownership, about showing up and not walking away when things get messy. I told her, "If they reach out, I'm happy to help." She paused. "They won't. Too much pride." "Then they'll lose the account," I said. She didn't argue. Not long after that, I was asked to speak, informally, at a small client event. They wanted me to talk about system resilience. I kept it simple. I talked about what happens when companies focus so much on innovation they forget what already works. About the cost of knowledge loss. About short-term thinking dressed up as long-term strategy. Afterward, a senior partner at a mid-sized firm pulled me aside. "We followed your work at your last company," he said, "and we saw what happened after you left. That's not the kind of disruption we want. Are you open to an advisory role?" I told him I'd think about it, but I already knew the answer. Somewhere along the way, it stopped being about what I lost. Yes, I gave 18 years. Yes, I was discarded without a word. Yes, it still stung. Not because I needed validation, but because I thought we were better than that. But the truth is, that moment forced a change I never would have made on my own. I was comfortable. Too comfortable. I stayed because I believed in the work. But the work had shifted. The values had shifted. And I hadn't realized how far things had drifted until I was on the outside, looking in. Now, I was solving problems that mattered, on my own terms. I was choosing the projects, not waiting for them to be handed down by people who didn't understand what they were asking for. And I was surrounded by a team that trusted each other. No hierarchy, no corporate ladder, just competence and respect. Then came the unexpected. One of the executives, one of the very people who signed off on dissolving my department, emailed me. Short message, no apology, just a subject line. Quick call? I ignored it at first, but he followed up. Said they were in a transition phase. Said they were evaluating ways to re-engage former subject matter experts. It was the most sanitized way I'd ever seen someone ask for help. I agreed to a call, out of curiosity, not obligation. He was polite, careful. You could hear the tightrope in his voice. He described a need to stabilize operational gaps and asked if I'd consider consulting. I asked what changed. He paused. We underestimated the complexity. I almost smiled, not because I wanted to rub it in, but because it was the first honest sentence he'd said. I didn't take the contract, not because I was bitter, but because I was busy, and because I wasn't going to walk back into the same structure that burned the people who kept it alive. But I offered to recommend someone. One of my team. Someone who'd left with integrity and built their own track record since. That's how things move forward. Not through revenge, but through quiet power shifts. Through credibility, through memory. Because when systems fail, they don't ask who held the title. They ask who knew how to fix it. Now, 6 months out, I look back with clarity I didn't have at the start. The hardest part wasn't the dismissal. It wasn't the email. It wasn't even the financial uncertainty. It was the silence. 18 years and not one word, not even a conversation. But that silence taught me something. You can't control how people leave you behind, but you can control what you build next. And sometimes what you build from the wreckage is stronger than anything they let you keep. There's a quiet power in not going back. I didn't reply to the follow-up email. The executive who once sat in a glass office overlooking the department he eliminated had tried again. This time, more apologetic. The wording softened, hinting at lessons learned and mutual respect for what we built. But I had already made my choice. The door wasn't just closed. It had been sealed by what wasn't said the day they pulled the rug out. Because it's never just about the layoff, it's about how they do it. And when there's no thank you, no recognition, no conversation, just deletion, that tells you everything you need to know about how they see you. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even surprised. I was done. And I had more important things to focus on. We'd grown to 6 full-time contractors by the end of month 5. Still no office, still no press, just work, real work. A logistics firm brought us in to repair their inventory forecasting system. A healthcare client wanted help integrating legacy infrastructure into new analytics. An energy startup asked us to redesign their scaling model before they took their Series B. Different problems, different industries, but the same thread. They'd all worked with bigger firms and gotten burned. Too expensive, too abstract, too slow. They wanted people who would show up, get their hands dirty, and explain things without hiding behind jargon or slide decks. That's where we fit. I never planned to create a firm, but the need was there, and so were the people. I hired one more. A guy who used to sit across from me back in the old department. We'd worked on a system conversion together. The kind of grinding, late-night project that breaks weak teams and bonds strong ones. He was thoughtful, quiet, and exacting in his execution. After he was let go, I hadn't heard much from him. Then I saw his name attached to a published white paper on cost reduction models in lean environments. I called him. He picked up like no time had passed. When I asked if he'd be interested in joining, he said, "I've been hoping you'd call." That was the 7th, and I stopped counting after that. 6 months in, we had momentum. I finally registered the company, officially, under the name Beller Systems. Not out of ego, but because I wanted the responsibility to be clear. If we failed, it was on me. If we succeeded, it was because of all of us. We weren't flashy. We didn't pitch at conferences or run ads. But clients stayed. They brought others. And soon, word of mouth replaced the need for outreach. One day, I opened our shared inbox and found a message from someone I didn't expect. A senior client from my old company, not the executive who fired us, but a partner I'd worked with on a dozen critical rollouts, had reached out quietly. He asked if we could help them stabilize some key functions. I knew what that meant. They were bleeding knowledge. Systems were fraying. And worse, their remaining teams didn't trust the leadership anymore. I agreed to meet, but on one condition: total autonomy. No middle layers, no internal politics. If they wanted things fixed, we'd do it our way, or not at all. He agreed. That was the first real turning point. The project wasn't easy. We had to rebuild what they'd dismantled, but without the original team or structure. So, we did what we always did. We listened. We walked through the systems. We talked to the actual users, the overlooked analysts, the people in operations who'd survived the layoffs, the ones who still showed up because they believed in the mission, not the management. And we solved it. Quietly. Effectively. We didn't ask for credit. We sent a simple, clear report and let the results speak. But the fallout came anyway, not for us, for them. When word got out that we had handled the fix, the firm led by the very people they fired, the internal backlash began. A few of the old executives stepped aside. Others were reshuffled into non-strategic roles. None of that brought me joy. I wasn't keeping score, I was building. But I'd be lying if I said it didn't feel satisfying. Not because they failed, because we didn't. At the 1-year mark, I sat down and looked at everything we had built. 27 active contracts, 12 core team members, 3 internal apprentices from local programs we'd partnered with, 0 debt. We had traction, and we had principles. We didn't work with clients who treated people like machines. We didn't chase the biggest dollar. We said no more than we said yes, and we were profitable. All from the fallout of one cold, quiet elimination. One night, I got a text from someone I hadn't expected to hear from again. It was the junior systems analyst who used to work under me. She'd landed a role at a new firm and was leading her first project. She said, "I just wanted to say thank you. I didn't realize how much I learned from you until I started doing it on my own." I sat with that message for a while. That, right there, meant more to me than any boardroom award or bonus from the old company ever had. Because that's the part the executives never see. The real value isn't in the systems you build. It's in the people who build them. And if you treat those people like numbers on a spreadsheet, they'll leave. But worse, they'll thrive without you. And then everyone sees who really carried the weight. I don't walk around angry. I don't talk about what happened unless someone asks. But when they do, when a young consultant or a burned-out manager sits across from me and says, "How did you bounce back?" I tell them the truth. I didn't bounce. I rebuilt. From the ground up. With people who cared more about doing it right than doing it fast. With honesty, with time, with humility. and with the quiet knowledge that being discarded isn't the end of your story. Sometimes it's the beginning of the part you were always meant to write. So yes, my boss eliminated my department after 18 years without notice. And no, I didn't fight it. I didn't beg for my job back. I didn't try to prove them wrong. I just built something better. And in the end, when the dust settled, they came looking for help from the very people they once walked past without a word. That's the thing about silence. It echoes longer than you expect. But so does integrity. And if you hold on to that quietly, deliberately, it builds. It builds into trust, into teams, into something they can't buy back. Not with money, not with spin, not even with regret, because by the time they notice, you're already gone, and better for it.